Welcome, friends, to Empty Cloud Monastery. So we just finished a couple of days ago our winter retreat, 3 months of winter retreat. So the monk chat was a little bit paused. It was on hold for a couple of months. So we'll see if anyone is going to show up tonight. But if anyone shows up and is interested in asking questions to the monastic Sangha at Empty Cloud, feel free to type in your questions, and at a certain point we will address them. And of course, also the residents here at the monastery are welcome to ask any questions about Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, or related to Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha that you feel like asking, and we'll try our best to answer it. So tonight I'm with Bhante Sudaso and I'm Ayasoma for the people who are not familiar with us. And we also have actually another venerable behind the scenes, Venerable Ratanapanya, who has just joined us here at Empty Cloud. And hopefully, maybe in the next couple of days, she will also appear online. But definitely, if you come at the monastery, you'll have the pleasure to meet another Thai bhikkhuni. We spent the winter retreat with a senior Thai bhikkhuni, and now we have another Thai bhikkhuni at the monastery. So it's quite lovely since, well, Bhante Sudaso was ordained in the Thai forest tradition. And my first monastery in this life was Thai forest monk. So we're very much, in love with your country and the Buddhism that is offered there.
So I see now that there's several people watching. So if you type in some questions, then we can go ahead and start answering questions.
Otherwise, we can have the shortest monk chat of the history of monk chat at Buddhist Insights. 1 minute, and that's it.
Do you have a question?
If you would just speak a little bit, or if you could, your thoughts about Kanti, patience in the practice, and the idea of patient endurance.
Yeah, well, I mean, just first off, it's important to understand that the word Kanti has several different meanings. And that also already starts to get you some sense as to what the practice of Kanti is. So the word Kanti can mean endurance, it can mean patience, it can mean acceptance, it can mean forgiveness. So it has a range of different meanings, but all of these are interrelated. So in order to endure something, you have to be patient and accepting. In order to forgive someone, you have to accept them as they are and be patient with their faults and endure their shortcomings. In order to be patient, you have to be willing to endure things. So all these different meanings of the word are interrelated. And one of the most commonly quoted lines from the suttas on this is from the Dhammapada, where the Buddha says, Kanti paramang tapo titika, which is, you could translate as, Kanti is the highest form of spiritual practice. Kanti is the foremost austerity. So this it's the best tapas, like the best spiritual fuel. So the Buddha put a lot of value and importance on practicing Kanti. And one of the things from my own training, which I got on this subject, is that patient endurance does not mean waiting for things to end. Because waiting for things to end is actually just aversion. It's, I hate this, I want it to stop, it's going to stop eventually, I'm just waiting for it to stop, this thing that I hate, it's going to stop. Like if you just keep running with those kinds of thoughts in your mind, that's not practicing Kanti. That's actually just practicing dosa. So Kanti is actually, this is why I said at the beginning that Kanti has these other meanings besides just patience and endurance. It also has the meanings of acceptance and forgiveness. Because truly practicing Kanti means accepting that what you're experiencing right now could last forever, and if it does, that's perfectly okay. And it won't, because everything is impermanent. But if it did last forever, that would be no problem because you accept it just as it is. So this is true Khanti. True Khanti is being perfectly okay with the current experience lasting forever. So not waiting for things to end. That's not Khanti. Those are a few thoughts. Do you want to say something about the topic?
Actually, well, that was great. Thank you, Bante. What comes to mind is actually a reflection that Ajahn Pasamno gave when he visited Empty Cloud Monastery last year, and was precisely on Khanti. And he invited us to reflect on how a lot of times we approach it with we stress so much the endurance part of the patience, so then it can seem like this big chore, and we kind of grit our teeth and be there, like, practice essentially aversion, as you were saying, rather than fully accepting how things are. So he was suggesting essentially to lower our standards always, to kind of, instead of expecting so much from everyone and everything, to lower our expectations and start really low. So instead of going like, oh, I want a minimum of respect, for example, then just expect that people are going to disrespect you. Like you just have a very minimum, like really low expectations. So then everything is a bonus. Like, oh, how great. I have not been insulted today. How wonderful. Like, thumbs up. So, having a different approach rather than constantly, chasing and seeking something that most often than not is unrealistic. We have lots of high expectations towards others, towards ourselves too. Sometimes when we're practicing the Dhamma, maybe we intellectually understand it, and then we are expecting so much from ourselves, like that we should be fully enlightened just because we read one sutta and we kind of understand it intellectually, but then our mind is a mess and we have greed, hatred, and delusion. So having a bit of patience, understanding that everything is dependently arisen, and if we don't expect too much from the outside world, then it's more tranquil, more peaceful. It really was very helpful for me. He probably said something a lot more wise than what I just said, but this was my interpretation after a year.
Last talk we had last night, there was a question on luminous mind. You told you would take it today.
If they repeat it in the chat window, unless you are asking that question.
Yeah, I wanted. That's why I reminded. Because there was, if there is other questions.
There's a few questions online, but I would also be fine with answering that one.
Yes, if you can answer the question, that would be great.
So it actually comes from a particular sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, where the Buddha says, Pabasarang idang chittang. So this mind is luminous. So pabasara means it's radiant, it's luminous, it's shining. And he says, I actually forget the exact phrasing, but he says it's defiled, like sankilita, by visiting defilements. Agantukehi kalesehi. So the mind is luminous, but it's darkened or dirtied by visiting defilements. So this particular sutta gets interpreted in a lot of different ways. But one way of understanding it is that the basic nature of mind, the basic nature of the mind is not to be defiled. The basic nature of the mind is pure and clear and bright. And defilements are temporary conditions that pass through the mind. So the mind is not the defilements. So this is actually quite important, because often what happens is that as we begin to make progress in our meditation practice and we become more aware of just how incredibly filthy our mind is, just what a disgusting, horrible mess this mind is, then often we start to think like this is the mind. The mind is a horrible, disgusting, filthy mess. And the Buddha is saying, no, it's not. That the dirt, the filth, the stains, the gross things, those are just temporary things that pass through the mind. They're like clouds that temporarily darken the sun. But the sun is still bright and shining. It's just temporarily darkened by the clouds passing in front of it. So in the same way, the nature of the mind is not defilement. The nature of the mind is just to know. That's all. The nature of the mind is to clearly know. That's it. So that itself is something that you can describe as radiant, as pure, as clear. But it becomes darkened and stained by defilements passing in front of it. So it's helpful to divide this, to distinguish between the mind and the objects of mind, or the mind and the states of mind, as being two separate things. Does that help? And I see many questions online now, so we should start
Yes.
taking some of these.
Yeah, good to see you all, friends. Hello to Maria, Andre, Tommy, Jayanta, good to see you. Bobby, Subasara, Christopher, Charles Lee, Gita, good to see you. So, all right, well, let's take Tommy's question that asks Universal Sangha. How is it important for the Sangha to stay grounded and united? Well, I think it's very much related to the question on patience. So yeah, we have a lot of different aspirations, right? That we can have on the Sangha, both if we are ordained and if we're not ordained. But the Buddha also says that if all it took for people to be enlightened to put a robe on, then we would do it to newborns, and then we would have a world full of enlightened beings. So yeah, a lot of times, actually, all the time, whenever when people ordain, they ordain, and then all their defilements ordain with them right after. So there is the Mahasangha, of course, or the Arya Sangha, actually, that is purely perfected in every single quality. And so that, I would say, is definitely a very grounded Sangha, and very much united because they have fully realized they have fully eradicated greed, hatred, and delusion. But as we're on our way, to full enlightenment, then there can be a lot of different opinions and attachments and delusions and greed and hatred that can arise in the mind. So sometimes the actual Sangha that we deal with, including ourselves, is not quite at par with the Arya Sangha. So yeah, I don't know. My practice is always to expect the worst and then delight in the best, and realizing that once again, the important thing is not the single individuals, but rather what the single individuals represent. And so obviously, if we are monastics, it's very important to stay grounded and be united, but also not expect too much from other ordained Sangha members.
Yeah, I mean, I would also add to that two things. So first off, to yourself, be deeply committed to the Dhamma. So if you want the Sangha to be grounded and united, well, actually, if every Sangha member is committed to the Dhamma, then they will naturally be grounded and united. So start with yourself. Make sure that you yourself are deeply committed to Dhamma. This doesn't mean you need to be perfect. It just means that you need to be trying to be more perfect every day. And the other important element that I would recommend is look for the good in others. So when you look at another person, you pay attention to another person, you're going to see a list of qualities, a list of positive qualities and negative qualities. And if you're a hate type, the list of negative qualities always somehow seems to be much longer than the list of positive qualities. I'm a hate type. I speak from experience on this one. So it's very important to focus on the positive qualities. So when you meet another Sangha member, Look at their positive qualities, appreciate their positive qualities, praise their positive qualities, and learn from their positive qualities. And try not to be bothered too much by their negative qualities. You can silently hope that they get over it eventually. But in the meantime, just focus on their good traits.
Okay, thank you, Bante. And Bobby asks, this morning's sutra study on respect brought to mind Linji's saying, if you meet the Buddha, kill the Buddha. What are your thoughts on that saying in general? Well, do you want to address it, Bante, since you gave the talk this morning?
Actually, I think this is a great question for you, since that's one of your favorite quotes from the Zen tradition.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. Actually, it's one of the first thing that I read actually about Buddhism when I first encountered Buddhism this current lifetime, and actually it was a Thai forest monastery, Santa Chitarama, the monastery in the Ajahn Chah tradition, right outside Rome. And actually, I had no idea that I was reading something that was, of a different lineage of the one that I was there. That what it was, and for me back then, had no idea. So they just had that book. I picked it up and I was like, wow, how incredible that this religion is really anti-dogmatic to the point that actually it encourages such strong statements as statements such as if you think you've seen the Buddha, kill the Buddha, which if we take literally is a very kind of scary thought, or quite repulsive too. But what it means is essentially the invitation in Buddhism not to have blind faith, but rather constantly questioning what we are believing, what we're doing, why do we think the things that we think? Why do we believe the things that we believe? And so when you also our accomplishments in the past, in the path, right? So essentially it's when you think the saying that we were saying earlier, when you think you are enlightened, go and see your family. Because sometimes in very peaceful conditions, if we're by ourselves, for example, in a cave in the middle of nowhere for many years, we can have a really great time and our mind can be full of loving kindness. And then as soon as we come out and we encounter someone who says something that we don't like or does something that we disapprove of, then all of that loving kindness is disintegrated in a second. So then we can have an understanding that actually our thoughts or ideas of what enlightenment is or what our accomplishments are very different from the experience in and of itself. And that's because we have produced a lot of habits of delusion. So essentially, all the teachings of the Buddha are meant to create an infrastructure so that this questioning, which is very different from the hindrance of doubt, of skepticism, right? It's more a practice of wisely doubting, wisely putting in question, like questioning our understanding of the Dhamma, our understanding of ourselves, and our progress in the path. Our idea of what enlightenment is, our idea of what arahants may look like or might be. In essence, it's basically the Kalama Sutta. Bante actually gave a Dhamma talk the other day on the Kalama Sutta. So pretty much I would say that this saying is the Kalama Sutta summarized in a sentence. So those are my thoughts. And I loved it, coming from a Catholic country where everything is a dogma and you're never invited to question anything. I was like, wow, not only you're invited to ask questions, but actually it's like a sort of pillar of the religion. So yeah, I'm one of the few Westerners, I think, that didn't got into Buddhism through meditation. Actually, at the very beginning, I was like, that's boring. I really loved the Vinaya practice of the monastics. I found very inspiring, and the philosophical stances, like they seemed very wise. I was delighting already back then. And Bhante, do you have anything to share on that?
I think you covered that really fully. Yeah, I don't have anything to add. Do you have a
Sayonara.
comment or a question?
Yeah, I was more connecting with the Bhante said it in the previous statement. Like every being has an enlightened mind already, so everyone has a Buddha within themselves. But what kamal they do, what they choose to do, either they would be cutting out their defilements and reaching towards the awakening, or they would be definitely killing the Buddha and leading to more suffering for themselves in the future. Like, so it's both in their hands.
No, you read it in that way. Interesting. Yeah. That's, yeah, I mean, the Zen tradition is all pretty much about putting these really thought-provoking statements that then get us to, we have this moment of shock and go and start questioning our assumptions. So that's actually a really great way to see it. There's not necessarily like the Kwato practice or the koan practice is all pretty much meant not necessarily to find an answer per se, a logical answer, but rather to create these conditions of fully contemplating. Essentially, is developing Dhammavichaya. So the enlightenment factor of discrimination of states. And Bob, sorry, I just read it. And Subhasaram asks, can you explain mudita, equanimity?
So those are two different things. So mudita is, literally it actually means joyfulness or rejoicing. So it's from the verb root mud, which means to rejoice or to be joyful. It's actually the same root from which we get the word anumodana, by the way. So anumodana means rejoicing together. So you see somebody do something good and you say anumodana. It means I'm rejoicing together with you. So mudita is from the same root. So mudita literally just means joyfulness. The commentaries explain it as specifically meaning a non-selfish joy. So a joy which is not limited just to me getting what I want, but which is also happy when other people get what they want or when others experience good fortune. And it's often explained as meaning specifically happiness at the good fortune of others, but I've always been a little uncomfortable with that explanation because all of the Brahmaviharas are defined as universal states which are not centered on a division of separate beings. So metta is may everyone be happy. Karuna is may everyone be free of suffering. So it always felt strange to me that then with mudita, it's like, may everybody except me enjoy their good fortune. That always seemed like kind of an odd explanation. So it's important to remember that mudita is also rejoicing in your own good fortune. So mudita is this quality of joyfulness and appreciation, which is not selfish, it's not self-centered, but rather it's appreciating everyone's good fortune equally, including your own, just as with metta and karuna. So that's mudita. And equanimity is commonly the translation for upekkha. So upekkha is actually one of the most important qualities of mind to develop in Buddhism. So upekkha is when you clearly see your experience, but are not moved towards either liking or disliking. So you're fully aware. So this is not apathy or dullness or spacing out. You're fully aware of the experience, but without preference, without desire or aversion. This is what we mean by upekkha, by equanimity. Okay. Do you have any thoughts on this?
I think that's pretty great. Thank you, Bhante. And Christopher asks, there is lots of focus on meditation. However, when I read the suttas, Lord Buddha did not go around teaching meditation. Lord Buddha went around teaching Dhamma. That's why Lord Buddha called us savakas, Dhamma listeners. Meditation are meant for monks. What are your views? The Satipatthana Sutta is targeted to monks. Well, let's break it down. it depends on what suttas you read. But the Buddha did in fact go around teaching meditation, or maybe actually he didn't really necessarily go around, but people went around him to learn meditation. That is part of the Dhamma. So it's part of the Noble Eightfold Path. So it is quite true. I will agree with you that is perhaps there's way too much focus on meditation these days, definitely in the West. In the West, there's definitely way too much focus on meditation. And then it becomes either the one-fold path, the two-fold path, in the best case scenario, the three-fold path, but not the Noble Eightfold Path. And, conversely, maybe sometimes in the typical stereotype, is that in Asian Buddhist environments, there's a lot of focus on merit. So I would say that actually maybe we should do an exchange program, which is actually what we're doing here at Empty Cloud Monastery. So everybody can practice the Noble Eightfold Path and make progress. But I have to say that definitely between the two, the sort of more Western approach or Eastern approach, I'm a much better fan of the Eastern approach, because as soon as someone is grounded in merit, then in Sila, then as soon as they start meditation practice, actually they make progress really quickly, really rapidly, from what I've seen from my experience. The other way around, there is progress, but it's, I would say, I think it entails a few lifetimes more, couple eons sprinkled. So yeah, definitely important to practice the Noble Eightfold Path. That is all of it in its entirety, the way out of suffering. In terms of meditation being meant for monks, no, not true. Actually, within the suttas, there are many accounts of lay disciples of the Buddha that are very accomplished in meditation, and as a matter of fact, they also teach monastics actually in the suttas. So anyone can make progress in the path. It's easier for monastics just because we have more JOMO, joy of missing out, rather than FOMO, fear of missing out. So, we're quite happy. But really, the Buddha, created the fourfold Sangha, so the fourfold assembly, rather, actually, is the more appropriate English term. And it's a symbiotic relationship. So we're all aiming towards the same direction, and we all support each other. And so actually, how we were saying, I think a few evenings ago, actually, it wasn't with Bhante Sudaso, but with Bhante Jay. Yeah, there would be no monastics without lay people, but also no lay people without monastics. So we all take precepts and we all practice to support one another. And that creates beautiful mind states that are very supportive to attain supreme blissful nibbana.
I think mostly with reference to Satipatthana or any sutta, usually the starting is like all the bhikkhus, you listen carefully and I'll speak, and then yes, Bhante, the monks reply. So this should not be misunderstood. Like it's only for
Yes,
Yeah.
Sure.
The sutta it is monks.
Yes, thank you, Sayale Gotami, for pointing that out. Yeah, I mean, obviously, also one needs to pay attention to the translations as well, because actually, if one is so literal in the translations, also especially from a language like Pali to English, for example, it just seems that the Buddha only is speaking to male monks and ignoring the rest of the world. So, like, he's talking to 4 people, and then good luck, everybody else. But for example, actually coming from Italy, so we have such a thing as a gendered language. So everything is gendered. The table is gendered. The statue is gendered. Everything is gendered. And the masculine is actually both the masculine in terms of male, but also it's what we call the generic masculine, I think in English, in the grammatical term, which means that when there is someone neutral, like non-binary, maybe to speak about what, when it's gender non-binary, the grammatical rule is to actually default to the masculine. And when there is a group of mixed people, you actually default to the masculine too. So that's how the language works. And I was raised with that, and I never even questioned it. Like, it's very, that's obvious. But obviously, when you translate things and you go into different grammatical sort of rules, then it can seem that the person, it's translated in a way that it's very restrictive to just one group of people. So yeah, all the teachings of the Buddha then, the Buddha then is also only teaching Indian people. So I think then if we start getting all these attas together and it becomes, everybody's dead, the people that he spoke to. So this doesn't apply to anyone,
The Dhamma is only for dead people.
Yeah,
it's only for dead male
Indian
monks in ancient India. That's it.
Exactly. So, all the Thais and the Sri Lankan people, the Chinese people, forget about them. It's just didn't apply to any of these people. So, yeah, we should focus less on the form, perhaps, and more on the content. So the Buddha is not teaching doctrine. He's teaching the way out. And so we can practice, wherever we're at, we do our best to practice as much as we can. And that's the only intention that we should have. We shouldn't start going like, oh, that's for lay people, and that's for monastics, and that's for Indian people, and that's for Italians, and that's for it's just actually a bunch of excuses of not really, doing the work. And Charlesley asks, I know of a 15-year-old person who has been very committed to Dhamma practice for several years. Great. Could someone this young begin training as a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni in a Western monastery?
Well, they can go to live in a monastery, assuming they get permission from their parents and the monastery is okay with someone that age. I've seen, I don't think as young as 15, but I've seen people who are 16 and 17 staying in monasteries for extended periods of time. As far as ordination, one of the basic ordination rules is that a person must be at least 20 years old in order to receive higher ordination. So someone can become a novice when they're less than 20, a samanera or samaneri. But in order to become a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni, they must be at least 20 years old. There's some debate around this with some of the bhikkhuni rules, but that's beside the point. So we'll just say 20 to keep things simple. So they can definitely go and begin training and even receive the lower ordination, the novice ordination. And then when they become 20 years old, they can receive the higher ordination. But it depends on the monastery. With anything like this, you always need to ask the monastery if it's okay, and they'll tell you if they're ready for that or not.
Okay, thank you, Bante. And I don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm sorry. Xwip. Asks, do you know Titsar Lepar? I also don't know Titsar.
No.
Sorry.
No.
And
probably the name of a monk or something, but I don't know.
And Andre asks or says, I feel very strong inspiration contemplating sutta fragments where the Buddha described his own search and struggles to find the right path. Also, early Buddhism, as explained by Bhante Analio, Bhante Sujato, etc., feels very helpful to me in discerning what could be more original in the texts. Do you have some similar experiences or advice? Well, our entire monastery is founded on early Buddhism, so to speak, or the aspiration to kind of really understand the teachings of the Buddha, the original teachings of the Buddha. But that's a work in progress, so there's lots of different investigations that I think are very useful to do. Actually, personally, what I really like, aside from reading books, etc., is actually to live in an international monastery. It seems like I'm tooting my own horn, but I quite like it, clearly, because, I created it. So But jokes aside, actually, I find it very useful because there's so many different people, some born Buddhists, some convert Buddhists, the latter being myself. And we all come to the practice with our preconceived ideas and preconditioning, but also genuine love and commitment towards the Dhamma. And, there's different also within, it's not that every, even like Theravada, like Asian Buddhist country, practices in the same exact way or holds the Dhamma or the Vinaya in the same exact way. So I find it very healthy because then one can start seeing what are actually the sort of the really common denominators that have been pretty much left intact across all traditions, including Mahayana and Vajrayana, by the way. So the tenets, like for example, karma and rebirth, present everywhere. Bowing, present everywhere. Buddha statues present everywhere. So there must be also something to also what, there's no mention of Buddha statues in the early text, for example, and actually historians tell us as much that there weren't. Most likely there weren't any representations of the Buddha until significantly later on, centuries later on. So, if we get too much into the kind of conceptual early Buddhism, we start throwing out everything, and then we're left with one brick and one, leaf. But instead, what it's important, at least my aspiration in terms of early Buddhism is trying to understand what is the purpose, for example, of statues. What is the message that has been preserved by our ancestors, essentially, that by people who, for the past 2,500 years, both monastic and lay people in Asia, who have preserved the teachings in these formats and certain formats that are present across tradition. It's very worth investigating them and not throwing them out. So as I see it, they're actually still early Buddhism. It's because it has that flavor, that essence of Dhamma. It's a very skillful way to have Buddha present with us, remembering to pay respects every day, humbling ourselves, remembering that this is something that is not a fruit of our intelligence, not fruit of our, accomplishments, but rather it's actually something that has been given to us, something really precious that has been transmitted, and we should be respectful towards our original teacher, but also towards all the different people from Asian Buddhist countries. Stay tuned only on Buddhist Insights YouTube channel. As I read the Tipitaka, the Buddha passed away. They never come again. Am I correct? I don't understand.
So I think the point is that like after the Buddha passes away, after the Buddha's parinibbana, then he's not reborn again. I think that's what they're asking.
Okay. If I'm correct, then Vajrayana and Shakyamuni Buddha came in 8th century and teach King Trabhuti. Is it correct? I'll pass it on to Bhante Sudasa.
Honestly, I actually don't know what this question is asking about.
I would say that, for example, whether the Buddha, is here with us, dies or doesn't die, etc., like exists or doesn't exist, and all of those questions are simply in the category of wasting our time at best, and at worst, actually just creating more and more defilements and suffering. So that's also kind of why maybe my mind doesn't really lean towards investigating the question too much, because once again, the Buddha encourages us actually not to ponder these questions, but rather to always go back to the Four Noble Truths. So this is suffering, this is the cause of suffering, this is the end of suffering, and this is the way out of suffering. And once again, who cares about this? When we get into doctrine, then that's when the mind becomes very intellectual and stops relating to the Dhamma, something that instead invites us to come and see for ourselves. That actually is a tool that we use for liberation, that we use for the cessation of suffering. So there's lots of different ideas. We have a library here that right in front of me, and there's books and 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 like there are probably a million theories to answer your question. But whenever I encounter those books, I just put them back in the library, to be quite frank. So I'm not the best person to ask.
Okay, well, I think now I'm getting a better sense of what this question is saying. Well, first I would just say, briefly speaking, there's two wrong views that people commonly fall into regarding a Buddha after death. One common wrong view is that a Buddha ceases to exist when they die. The Buddha is very clear in the suttas that that's wrong view. The other wrong view is that people believe the Buddha continues to exist after death. That's also wrong view. So, and just as a very, very broad brush statement, the wrong view that the Buddha continues to exist after death tends to be more prevalent among Mahayanists, and the wrong view that the Buddha ceases to exist after death tends to be prevalent among Theravadins, just as a broad generalization. But it's good to keep in mind that both are wrong, both are incorrect. You can say that the influence of Shakyamuni Buddha is still with us, because otherwise we wouldn't be here practicing Shakyamuni Buddha's teachings. But what exactly that influence means and how it takes form and how it takes shape, well, that's something that you experience for yourself as you practice the Dhamma. Ultimately, what we're feeling right now is actually the touch of Shakyamuni Buddha extending over time and space. We're still in touch with the Dhamma because of what he did. So whether that means he's still tangibly present and tangibly teaching people, or whether it's a historical influence that comes through books and ordination lineages, it doesn't actually matter. It doesn't make any difference. The point is that we're still in contact with Shakyamuni Buddha because we're practicing the Dhamma that he taught. So in that sense, yeah, absolutely. I don't know the story you're talking about, but did Shakyamuni Buddha teach King Indrabhuti in the 8th century? Yeah, absolutely. Whether or not he did it in person as a corporeal being, or whether he did it indirectly through recorded sutta texts and ordination lineages, it doesn't actually matter at all, does it? It amounts to the same in the end.
Yeah, I remember one monastic saying that we are in Shakyamuni Buddha's Pure Land. I loved it. I became a Pure Lander in that moment. It's pretty great.
Yeah, the reason this looks like samsara is just because we're delusional.
Yes.
But it's actually already the Pure Land.
But it is quite actually amazing, 2,500 years later, that we have so much Dhamma accessible to us. Also a lot of Adhamma, but if we really look, closely, then there's also a lot of Dhamma that is actually very much present. Just online, for example, just at a click. It's the 2,500 years, it's possibly the most Dhamma that there has been available so easily to so many people at the same time. So yeah, we're quite very much in the Pure Land. Better take advantage of it. And Sud says, "Dear Venerable, can you please explain why after the end of a Buddhist teaching, they share the merits with the Devas? Is that Devas can't make merit themselves? Since there was a sutta I read where Devas tell a dying Deva that he needs to be reborn in the human realm to do merits." Maybe, Bhante, since you're a big fan of the Devas, I'll pass it on to you.
Devas can make merit. Actually, any sentient being can make merit. It's just a matter of making wholesome choices. It's actually much more difficult for beings in the lower realms to make merit, because they're often faced with very difficult dilemmas where they have to choose between two bad choices. But definitely Devas can make merit. It does tend to be difficult for them as well because they're usually too caught up with all the great parties that are going on in the heaven realms. They forget about making merit. But they can make their own merit. That's not a problem. The reason why we share merit with Devas, well, actually, we share merit with all beings. But we do tend to specifically mention the Devas. And one reason for this is because many of the Devas are themselves Buddhist and are committed to watching over and protecting us human Buddhist practitioners as well. So sharing merit with the Devas is, for me anyway, it's kind of a way of recollecting the Dharma protecting Devas and expressing gratitude for what they do to help us out. And also in reminding them to keep looking over us. So, for example, one of the common merit sharing verses, Akasa Tachibumata Deva Naga Mahitika Punyang Tang Anamoditva Chirang Rakhantu Sasanang. That last line means, may you protect the sasana for a long time. So we share merit with them, like, hey, I've made some merit, please anumodana, please rejoice in this merit, and please keep protecting the sasana. Don't forget about your vow to watch over the sasana and its practitioners. So I actually really love sharing merit with Devas personally. It always puts a smile on my face.
It's growing on me. Christopher says, first 4 disciples were enlightened from listening the Dhamma instead from meditation. Sure, but they had also I think reached up to the formless attainments. So I think they had already practiced a lot of meditation.
Yeah.
At the time they had done way more than us average folks.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the Buddha started teaching to those who had really very little dust in their eyes. And they had very little dust in their eyes because they had been practicing also a lot of meditation as well as other beneficial practices. So I'm sorry, Christopher, to break the news. You got to meditate.
I think you just busted his strategy.
Yes. I understand, because also at the very beginning I was like, oh, yeah, I mean, whatever. This mindfulness thing.
Well, meditation is hard. So it's understandable that you don't want to do it. But start with doing simple, easy, fun practices like metta. And as time goes by, you start to appreciate meditation more. Also start with little bits, like 5 minutes a day. Can make a really big difference just doing 5 minutes a day. And eventually you start to appreciate the practice more. Yeah, there's no getting around it. This is a really important part of the Eightfold Path. It actually fits into right view, right attitude, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. That's 5 out of the 8 parts of the Eightfold Path include meditation. So that's more than half of the Eightfold Path. And then that supports your ability to observe and guard your mind so that you don't screw up the precepts and therefore break the other 3 parts of the Eightfold Path. So meditation is directly related to 5 of the Eightfold Path, and it indirectly supports the other 3. So you really can't get around it. You don't have to do it. You don't have to. But just accept the fact that this is something the Buddha taught, and it is really important.
You have to.
So good cop, bad cop.
Bhavani says, Namaste. Without the teachings from monastics, for me, Buddha would be a beautiful statue and his teachings will be full of doubts. Monastics are present bodhisattvas for me. Oh,
that's very
so sweet.
Yeah.
And hello to all good friends, Amaranta, Damtulad. Oh, Pate Kusala.
Oh.
Satu. Good to see you.
Great.
Venerable.
Welcome. Yeah.
And Sujan, Gita, Jyoti. All right. Sud says, with regards to right view, sutta and right view, why does it start with wholesome and unwholesome, and then nutriment, and then the 4 noble truths? Is it because right view is in grades, like simple right view, then more complicated right view? Bante?
It's your turn.
No, I spoke longer.
I've actually never thought too much about the sequence of items in the Sammaditthi Sutta. I actually tend to relate to each section as being a standalone teaching on right view. So actually my answer is that I actually don't really see them as being deliberately sequential, but rather it's simply Venerable Sariputta giving several different ways of approaching the topic of right view, of samadhi. And it's the same. There's many other suttas where the Buddha gives a variety of alternative ways of approaching samadhi. And all of these are correct. They're like the different facets of a single gem. They're all different ways of coming to the same point, which is a clear perception of reality on its own terms. But just looking at what you're saying, like wholesome and unwholesome, that's actually a really important place to start, because that's emphasizing the moral component of Buddhism, the ethical component of Buddhism. Ultimately, actually, all of Buddhism is about doing what's wholesome and avoiding what's unwholesome. That's everything. If you recognize the deepest, most profound implications of wholesome, then you realize that it encompasses the entire Eightfold Path. So that's actually a very profound statement right there. So do what's wholesome, avoid what's unwholesome. There's actually a really lovely Zen story where a student goes to the master and asks the master to summarize the Buddhist teachings. And the master replies, "Do good, don't do evil." And the student says, "Well, that's so simple. Even small children know that." And the master says, "Yes, even small children know that. And even old seniors have a hard time practicing it." So this is really foundational. Do the wholesome, don't do the unwholesome. This is the entirety of the Buddhist teachings. Anyway, those are my thoughts.
Great. Thank you, Bante. And Scott says, I'm making a big effort to cultivate metta and goodwill for all beings. It is hard to spread goodwill for those who harm us on purpose. Can the Venerables share an example where they have been successful in this endeavor? Patience. That's the answer. So, yeah, well, first of all, once again, it's not that necessarily just by practicing metta meditation, then we're able to spread metta to the people that harm us, but rather I think it's a byproduct of the Noble Eightfold Path, practicing the Noble Eightfold Path in general. So it also requires a development of equanimity. It also requires a development of understanding experientially dependent origination, which generates equanimity. And then through the strength of clearly seeing closely, then, well, first of all, we can stop hating them, which is the first part, instead of going straight to the big aspiration of like, the simile of the saw. So the simile of the saw is the aspiration and the end result. But there's a way there. And definitely we don't put ourselves in, when we're completely unenlightened and full of defilements, in a situation where people are sawing like literally our limbs, and then of course we'll have all sorts of like crazy ideas, crazy emotions happening. So we avoid situations of harm, but we train ourselves first of all in non-hatred, and then by cultivating wisdom, we understand that we really understand why people are behaving the way that they're behaving. And then that's when we start cultivating compassion, because we understand that, essentially we're trembling together. We have anukampa. It's my favorite, actually, translation of what is normally translated as compassion, of anukampa. So trembling together, that we're all, kind of hitting and missing, and big jumbles of messes. And why are we expecting others to be different than us, or us different than others? When we are kind of untrained, we are this asutta vapatujanas floating around. And from there, then you can create the conditions for metta to really arise, because you're fully understanding yourself and others, and then understanding that, of course, may they be happy. If people were happy, and if we were happy, we wouldn't be mean. We wouldn't be causing harm to others and ourselves. So that's why it's all kind of an interconnected process, but it's very difficult. It's very advanced practice to really be fully, with a mind of loving kindness all the time, even for people that we actually like and that are not harming us all the time. It's very difficult to have a mind full of loving kindness. Even the cute cat up here, the monastery cat, sometimes he's quite annoying. So it's difficult, for the mind to be 24/7 with loving kindness until it's fully awakened, I would say. So yeah, having patience with ourselves and others, and cultivating the path, and strengthening metta for that comes, the sensation, rather than directed for one particular person, whether we like them or not. Actually focusing on developing metta as a mind state first and foremost, and then restraining ourselves, not harming, not not reacting as well. That's a big thing. I'm sorry?
Being owner of our karma.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, Ayurveda is sharing a very important thing of understanding the principle of karma, which actually is essentially, as a result, has equanimity. Really understanding that this is not personal. It's not that people, have created this plot. Like, oh, Ayasoma, that evil bhikkhuni there at Empty Cloud Monastery. Let's, they're born with this mission of like harassing me, and but rather it's all causes and conditions, and it's really impersonal. So I hope that is helpful. Christopher says, apology. To ask lots of questions. We like lots of questions, so don't apologize. It is stated in Majjhima Nikaya 43, the Mahavedalla Sutta, friend, there are two conditions for the arising of right view. One, the voice of another teaching the true Dhamma. I love how you're getting so skillful at this. Christopher, you're great. Gathering all this information, he's a lawyer. For example, the Savaka hearers, listeners. Two, focused attention. For example, yoniso manasikara. These are the two conditions for the arising of right view, which also means right view is not attained through meditation. I knew you were going to come to that result.
Yeah,
okay,
so Christopher, I see you have a mission, and I have to say I respect your dedication. It's a little misguided, but nonetheless, I respect your dedication. Well, first off, once again, it's important not to cherry pick the suttas. Read all the suttas cover to cover, and take all of it together within the context of the entire Sutta Pitaka. So, of course, if you pick any one random sutta and you start with a mission of interpreting it to mean that you don't have to meditate, then of course you're going to find some way of interpreting it to mean that you don't have to meditate. Actually, you can take a quote from almost anywhere in the suttas, and you can interpret it to mean whatever you want it to mean. So, but actually, I can take exactly the same quote from the Mahavedalla Sutta and tell you why that's about meditation. So, of course, voice of another. So another person tells you the Dhamma that helps right view to arise. But yoniso manasikara in many suttas is effectively equated with meditation practice, training of the mind through meditation exercises. So yoniso manasikara, by the way, this is an interesting term. It's not to be skipped over lightly. Focused attention is not a correct translation. Wise attention is also not a correct translation, though that's very common. Yoniso, literally it means based on the origin, based on the source. The word yoni means womb. Literally it means womb, a woman's womb. So the yoni of all things, like what is it that causes the arising of all things? So yoniso manasikara means paying attention to the causal process that underlies all experience. And of course, the main way we do that is through meditation practice. Sorry, you really can't get around this one.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bante. And But keep going. I'm really enjoying this, Christopher. Shadow Label asks, are the rules in Buddhism on premarital sex or casual sex for lay people? Well, I will say that there's no sex for monastics, so it definitely cannot be for monastics. For monastics, we uproot the problem. We uproot the problem. Make it like a palm stump. We just throw it out and no sex, that's it. But in terms of premarital or casual sex, actually, there's none of that in the suttas. The Buddha is completely unconcerned with whether or not we're married or not married, or whether it's the same gender or the opposite gender, if it's one person, two people, etc., etc. Really, the focus is on essentially consent. So, are the people that are engaging in the sexual relationship all on the same page? Are we violating trust? Are we violating not only the trust of like the person that is that we're engaging in a sexual relationship with, but also the ramification of that person at large? So their family, if they're dependent on their family, if they're dependent on other people, etc. So that's why it's very much related to actually, I think, what we're talking about these days in this country, in the US, in terms of consent. There's lots of different ramifications that it's good to keep in mind so that everybody's on the same page and it's very clean. But yeah, that's pretty much it. The Buddha is not interested. My understanding of Buddhism anyway is that contrarily to many other sort of religious systems that had a specific mission of creating an order in society, while the Buddha was not preoccupied in creating a sort of status quo where certain people do this and certain people do that, but rather, once again, it's a teaching to get out of suffering. And one of the easiest ways to get in trouble and create a lot of suffering for yourself and others is cheating on your partner, going with underage people, that upsetting the parents, like creating, it has so many different ramifications that you really don't want to go there. So keep it clean, keep it safe, and start controlling your sexuality. Essentially, that's all there is. All the rest, it's, if you find it presented in Buddhist context, then it will usually be very different from country to country, and usually influenced by either other systems of thought, like Confucianism, for example, that is an Eastern influence from China, or Brahmanism, another influence from India and ancient India. And then colonialism has had a influence with all the different Judeo-Christian religions that, on the other hand, have a very specific intention in how a family is supposed to be generated. So yeah, those are not teachings of the Buddha. I don't know if you want to add anything about it.
No, that was pretty thorough. I do just want to add in, by the way, that some of the Buddha's most prominent female lay disciples were prostitutes, and they became stream enterers. So they were having lots of premarital and casual sex, and yet they were able to become stream enterers. And the Buddha never once condemned them for their livelihood or for their activities. So if it was a problem, the Buddha would have said something, but he never did. So it's clearly not a big deal in Buddhism. And I think the assumption that it's a big deal, as Ayasoma was saying, is because people see that premarital sex and casual sex are so strongly condemned in other religions, and they just assume that it must be the same in Buddhism, but it's not the same in Buddhism. The Buddha really didn't care.
Yeah.
It's before you are into the religion, but once you are into the religion, then he asks us to restrain from doing any sexual intercourse with or cheating with others.
Well, I mean, in a perfect world, actually, if you really want to follow the Buddha's teachings to the highest level, then as Ayasoma was saying, you just become celibate. Because all sexual activity arises from craving and fuels craving. So if you want to uproot craving, then you want to stop doing any activity which feeds craving. For somebody who's not interested in celibacy, instead the Buddha says to avoid sexual misconduct, which, as Ayasoma was saying, it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not you're married to your partner, but rather it's about respecting the boundaries of trust in your relationships. So if you know that, if you find out that your partner is married, then you don't do anything with them. Or if you yourself are married to somebody else, well, you don't do anything with a new person. Or if you want to, you consult with everyone who's involved and make sure everybody agrees with what's going on. So this is what the Buddha is talking about. He's talking about either best case scenario, be completely celibate. Second best, don't hurt anyone.
Yeah.
But he doesn't care about marriage. The Buddha didn't create a marriage sacrament or a marriage ceremony, or nowhere in the suttas does he say you must be married in order to sleep with people. Like, it's just not there anywhere. Well, he doesn't even say to have only one partner. That's also not in the suttas. In fact, many of his disciples had multiple partners.
Yeah. It was actually very common back then to have multiple partners.
But maybe it's more, not cheating the one you are in.
Yeah, or the multiples that you're with, as the case may be.
Yes.
Yeah, so not cheating. Not abusing anyone, being very honest and straightforward and kind in your relationships.
Yeah, essentially, whenever the Buddha, my understanding is whenever we also find suttas where he talks about how to sort of behave in the household or in the family or whatever it is, secular sort of environments, it's more about taking advantage of whatever kind of situation you're in to develop wholesome mind states. But it's not about policing people into getting into a particular sort of relationship or procreating. Like, for example, there's zero emphasis on procreating in Buddhism. As a matter of fact, actually, Buddhist countries are the lowest in procreation rates because the religion doesn't put that much emphasis on it. And Judeo-Christian religions, well, now these days, actually, a lot of them have gone down because people have lost faith. But historically, there's a huge emphasis on procreation, which is why Christianity actually is like number one, because you produce a lot of Christians. But these days, Islam is becoming number one because they have the same root, and there is a huge emphasis on this. And Muslim people are usually still believing in their faith, and there's an emphasis on reproduction throughout, whether it's Judaism, Islam, or Christianity. So it's not to say that these religions are doing anything, despicable or whatever, but rather it's just not the purpose of the Buddha. There's no, he's like, just be nice. Yeah, develop the parami of truthfulness and help the Brahma Viharas. And H. Parker says, Venerables, what are examples of bringing things to a painful point? Could one example be when someone speaks in a fatalistic way, which causes a sense of helplessness and sadness in the listener? Okay.
I don't quite understand this question. I don't understand what the quote "bringing things to a painful point." I don't know what that's talking about.
I think it's more related to like being into a conversation and then to make a point, speaking harsh words or sharp words that can hurt someone's feelings.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, the Buddha's 5 guidelines for right speech are quite helpful here. So to speak truthfully, to speak at the right time, to speak beneficially, to speak gently, and to speak with a mind of loving kindness. These are also the 5 requirements before criticizing someone. You have to have these 5 conditions met before you should criticize somebody else. So I would actually recommend using those as your 5 basic guidelines before saying something. That's what comes to mind for me anyway.
And Shadow Label asks, is it normal for the body to twitch and have high-pitched tinnitus? Tinnitus?
I think we say tinnitus in English, which of course is not how the word is actually pronounced in Latin. I assume it's a Latin word?
I assume, yeah.
Yeah,
Tinnitus.
we don't pronounce it correctly in English.
Ringing
Ringing
Yeah.
ear.
Tinnitus?
Tinnitus noise while letting go in meditation and becoming hot. Bhante, do you want to take this?
So body twitching, no. Body twitching is not a good sign. Tinnitus or tinnitus or tinnitus or whatever, that's actually relatively common during meditation. So that's nothing to worry about. The body becoming hot, changes in body temperature are also quite common during meditation, but it's not something to take any interest in. It doesn't matter at all. So sometimes your body will feel cold or hot when you're meditating. Just don't worry about it. Just keep doing your practice. But the twitching is not so great. Try to let your body relax. Let your body just soften and sink into stillness. If your body is twitching, that's usually not a good sign. It's usually a sign that you're too tense, or that you're like trying to like force yourself into meditation. That's usually not very productive. Those are my thoughts.
Great. Maybe you can also take this, since it's also related to meditation. What are your thoughts on focusing on one type of meditation practice versus practicing many types? What should a beginner like me do, given people give opposing advices?
You should try out lots of different things and see what happens. See how it works. It's actually the nature of things is that there are many different meditation techniques, and they work well for different kinds of people, and also they work well under different situations. So my own training was to learn many, many different meditation methods and to experiment with many different ways of meditating. And through that process of experimenting, you start to get a deep understanding, one, of your own mind, and two, of how these different meditation practices affect your mind, and when it's proper to use which method. So these days, I have a kit of about half a dozen meditation methods that I can choose from depending upon the current needs of my mind, and a few others that I use more rarely for more specialized conditions. So I actually think it's really, really good to experiment with a variety of meditation techniques and really pay attention to how they affect your mind.
Great. Thank you, Bante. And Sud also asks, there was an interesting question regarding simultaneous belief in God and also practicing the Eightfold Path, since submission to a deity seems in contradiction to following the path. This is with regard to a question that was asked with someone this morning.
Okay, do you want to answer this?
Sure. I would say, well, one doesn't really need to be a Buddhist in order to practice Buddhism, as the Dalai Lama, His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, and I think it's really true. Of course, then it comes to a point where you gotta let go everything. So that includes also pre-existing beliefs. But if someone has a pre-existing faith, actually, I think that practicing the Dhamma usually makes, Christian become a better Christian, and Muslim a better Muslim, and so forth, with all the different traditions. I am very biased here when you're asking me this question, so I'm probably not the right person because I am extremely monogamous. So I just love Buddhism. Within Buddhism, I love everything, but like I love the in Theravada, the Thai forest tradition, the Sri Lankan tradition, like every single pretty much tradition, more or less. And but then I also love Mahayana and Vajrayana. Like basically, as soon as I listen to the Dhamma, my mind delights. Everything else, no. So, and I was raised in Italy, where basically it's the Catholic version of Thailand, where everybody is, I mean, there's basically just Catholic everything. Thailand, there's a temple after the other, like Buddhist iconography everywhere. In Italy, it's only Catholicism. So I grew up actually with the sense that it was either Catholicism or nothing. So I picked the latter because the former didn't really make much sense to me back then. Well, it's true. So then, when I encountered the Dhamma, for me, it was just, like, the first time that I even considered any sort of religion, like, to invest some time in in any sort of type of religious system. So I'm saying this because I think that this kind of disqualifies me from answering in an objective way to this answer.
Maybe like I see from another background, it's more, I prefer like the God thing because like I've seen in many like Christianity religion, there's lots of metta and giving and acceptance, and seeing it with the perspective of Buddhism, there's like Devas thing, the concept of Devas. So recollection of goodness, then it is.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you, Sayala. She's mentioning all the different bodhisattvas that essentially exist. Yeah, in Catholicism, actually, it's a perfect match, I would say. All the different saints. Well, that's basically what Catholicism did with paganism beforehand. So actually, ancient Rome was no different than ancient India. It just had different names. So they were then converted into saints. So San Gennaro, I don't know how you say it in English, was some kind of divinity beforehand. So they just were reintroduced. So we can get them back into the pantheon. But once again, I think the important thing is rather to focus on the Four Noble Truths when we're approaching Buddhism, and use the teachings of the Buddha to really cultivate wholesome mind states. And then what we believe is something that can Buddhism can support at the very beginning, and then if we really make progress in the path, then we can start perhaps reevaluating our ideas or associations, maybe. And Charlesy says, I've enjoyed the Therigatha. I think Anagarika Jens sent it to him. So Anumadana to Anagarika Jens and Charlie, I'm happy you've enjoyed it. And Christopher says, well, first Christopher had said that it shows meditation is a requirement.
Good. That's progress.
Then Christopher says, seems like Four Noble Truths are not truths. Four Noble Truths are basically solutions to a problem, which is existence. For example, sufferings. What are your thoughts? There is no thing called truth in the world. There are only views. If truth is one and no second exists, debates will never arise among folks. A variety of truths they themselves do form. Gurus therefore never speak of one truth. Never was there a variety of truths other than sensations perpetuating in the ...
No. There is truth. It's called Dhamma. Okay, next question.
That's the first element of the Noble Eightfold Path, right view.
Yes.
And Hassan says, Mante, can you please explain Prabhasara Chitta or luminous mind? Is that Buddha nature?
I spoke a bit about this earlier. Some people do interpret that as meaning Buddha nature. And I think that's a reasonably valid interpretation. That's not quite how I explained it earlier. Earlier, I explained the luminosity of the mind is referring to its innate purity and its ability to clearly know, which is related to the concept of Buddha nature, but not identical with. But some people do interpret that sutta about Prabhasara Chitta as being a reference to Buddha nature. So I think that's a reasonably valid interpretation.
And Shadow Label actually is sharing, I'm Catholic and learned from Buddhists. I find Buddhists to be more accepting than Catholics, accepting me using Buddhist ideals, but my priest says I'm good to go. Well, I have to say that actually also Catholics can be very accepting. When we went, for example, in November to Italy, most of the people that were offering alms were Catholics, and they were fully aware that we are not Catholics. I mean, pretty evident. So yeah, once again, there are certain, I would say, getting back to the question before, especially when it comes to sila, for the most part, we're all on the same page. I think that Buddhism delves a little bit deeper. So, for example, with no killing, it's not just related to human beings, but everyone, every single sentient being. And that actually, really empowers you to develop compassion. Like, really, Jesus said so many beautiful things, like love your neighbor like yourself. But then if your neighbor is not that nice, then how do you do it? It's very difficult. So most people do it with a lot of faith. So I've encountered incredible Catholics. So I was not Catholic because I hated Catholicism. It was just that I didn't have faith. So it just didn't make much sense to me. Like what do you do if you don't have natural blind belief in something? But if you have that momentum, then you can actually be a really powerful practitioner and perhaps develop compassion through those means. I mean, to a certain degree, that's also present in Buddhism. There are lots of different also practitioners aside from the suttas that the Buddha says as much, but also I've met incredible, Buddhists who were born Buddhists. Never met a convert with these qualities, but someone who was born Buddhist, clearly good karma from past lives, that, like they do hardly any meditation, if any meditation at all, and have a mind imbued of loving kindness like that. Just very simple, very easy, incredible. So yeah, that can be a means, to an end. But if you don't have that, then, or if that is not cultivated to that extent, then I feel like Buddhism gives you really some good tools to actually become a good Christian, as I was saying earlier.
It's actually a cute thing. There was a Catholic monk who liked to come and visit Abhayagiri every once in a while. And somebody once asked him why he liked to come to a Buddhist monastery, since he's actually a Catholic. And he said, because it's nice to come and hang out with real Christians.
Oh, that's adorable. And sometimes vice versa, like Catholic monks can be some really good Buddhists. And Hassan says, not a Dhamma question. Aya, did you grow up in northern or southern Italy? I grew up all over the country. So I'm 100% Italian, but I have no idea where I'm from. So it was actually pretty great. It's another reason why I love Buddhism, anatta. I was like, finally an explanation of the chaos of my mind. Amaranta says, I'm having a hard time. I'm having a hard time trying to return to my normal life after COVID infection, and the activities of my job made me feel tired. I'm tired all the time and meditation is not being good. What would you recommend, Bante?
So I think Bantes is plural, so I think that includes you as well.
I know, but I wanted to pass it to you, so I
Okay.
made it singular.
Okay. Well, first off, I would say don't try to return to your normal life. Whatever your life was before the pandemic, before your COVID infection. So I think she got COVID recently.
Yeah.
Whatever your life was like before that, well, that's over. It's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. So rather, your question should not be, how can I get back to the way I remember things used to be? Rather, your question should be, how can I make the most of the way things are now? So forget about the past. It doesn't exist. Rather, look at the present moment and ask yourself, what can I do with this present moment? How can I make the most of this present moment? And also, as far as your meditation, you say your meditation is not good these days. Well, also, I would encourage you, don't expect anything from your meditation. Don't expect it to be any particular way. Don't expect it to feel good. Don't expect it to be peaceful. Don't expect it to be anything at all. Just keep doing it. When it's time to meditate, go and sit down on your cushion, set your timer, do some meditation methods, and when the timer goes off, get up. And it is whatever it is. But the point is that through persistent, ongoing practice, results come. But don't expect anything in particular, because you really never know what's going to happen when you sit down to meditate. Every time is new. Every time is fresh. You never know. So those are my thoughts. And I'm sorry that you're having a hard time.
Yeah.
But just keep coming back to the basics. Remember your own goodness. Recollect the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. Recollect the blessings of the practice. And keep practicing Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. And then you can't go wrong. Things only get better.
Sadhu. And Shadow of Label says, do Buddhists believe in free will or free agency? Isn't that synonym? Free will, free agency?
I think they're the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah, of course. Otherwise, yeah. It would be just suffering, just the First Noble Truth. Yeah, so essentially, the Buddha sheds light on how, our experience essentially is, of course, we are reaping the fruits of past karma, which is called vipaka. So consequences of previous actions. And in every moment, we can make new actions that will have new results to be experienced in the future, either the immediate future or the sort of delayed future or the very future. But yeah, in every moment, we have the opportunity to make a new choice. And by learning the Dhamma, we understand what the good choice is rather than kind of go randomly, yes, I'll do this or I'll do that, hit or miss. And we hit once and miss a million times and experience a lot of suffering. And Chris says, please explain to them no mind, beginner's mind. That could be a talk.
Yeah, that's a whole talk right there.
Yeah, I'll put it down, jot it down. Thank you, Chris. And Venerable Gyanaratna, to see you, Venerable, asks, can you explain about what's the conscious mind and what is an unconscious mind? It's also Dhamma talk, but maybe you have some words to share briefly.
And briefly, conscious mind is the mind which knows, the mind which is aware. And unconscious is when the mind is not aware, and when there isn't knowing. That's a very brief answer.
Thank you. And Janaki, I hope I'm pronouncing it properly this time. She said it's different. And truth is what you can test many times and get the same results, reveals the same outcome or observation, then it is the truth accepted in this world we're living in and felt by our senses.
Okay.
Thank you. And last question from Chris. Since you mentioned Dhamma is truth, is Dhamma ultimate truth, reality?
That's actually one translation of the word Dhamma. But normally when we talk about Dhamma, we mean the teachings of the Buddha, which are concepts that help point us in the direction of ultimate truth. Okay?
Realize it for yourself via meditation.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, but I think
we have 2 more questions left, so we can do it. Sud says, Dear Bhante, the Buddha said parents are our first teachers and they should be respected like Brahma. What if they give advice opposite to right view? How do you respectfully reject the wrong views?
So respecting your parents does not mean that you have to believe everything they say, and it doesn't mean you have to do everything they tell you to do. So ultimately, our most important teacher is the Buddha, and our most important commitment is to the Dhamma. So if your parents tell you to go out and kill someone, well, then you respectfully tell them, thank you for your recommendation. However, I've taken a precept of not killing people. So sorry, Mom, I can't do this for you. But you do so respectfully. So yeah, respect your parents, appreciate your parents, but also remember that your commitment to Dhamma is higher than your commitment to your parents.
1 second, last question. Shadow of Label. Why do monks eat twice a day? Well, actually, We don't have the rule of eating twice a day. That would be very intense. It's rather not eating after solar noon. So technically, we could eat multiple times from dawn, provided that like food is offered to us. Like we could eat multiple times, even a million times, like from dawn to noon. But usually in Western monasteries, we usually do breakfast and lunch at 11 a.m. In Thailand, that it's a tropical country, usually it's just one meal a day at 8 a.m., which more or less, right, Venerable? Yeah, early in the morning. And so it's, yeah, you don't need too much because it's hot. So there's not the freezing cold that comes in New Jersey. So that's sufficient. All right. So I think that's all for this evening. Thank you all for joining us for Monk Chat. And we have resumed all our everything. It's back to normal after the winter retreat. So the monastery is open. And this Sunday, we're resuming also the in-person meditation practices. You're welcome to come all day on Sunday to the monastery. And then next Saturday will be the Upasata. So you're welcome also to come on Saturday to practice with the Sangha for the whole day. We'll have basically a day-long retreat. So hope to see you. The Shadow of Lego says, let's go till 10. I don't think that Bhante Sudaso is willing. But we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you all be well and happy, and may all good things come to you. Oh, Kevin, see you Sunday. Great.